one thing you need to know is how many delegates you're electing to from your precinct caucus to the county assembly. That's kind of an important piece of the mathematical puzzle. If you don't know how many delegates your precinct gets, it's going to be kind of hard to elect delegates. And finally, I have here that you needed your list of registered voters. Now we're kind of using VAN, so that's not as important as it has been in prior years. But each county, I think, is going to do that a little bit differently in terms of how they provide you the list of who's eligible to participate in your caucus. Whether that's done at some master table at your caucus location for all the precincts there, or whether you're going to be doing that room by room, precinct by precinct. The caucus sign is again, this is one of those things where I think we've already passed the deadline, but you have to have the caucus sign at your caucus location 12 days prior to the caucus. It's one of those big, precinct caucus location for the Democratic Party here, just like they have for the elections when they have a polling place. They put those big signs out at the polling places that say polling place for precinct number X. You can use one sign for all of the caucuses at one location. So if you have 10 precincts meeting at one school, for instance, you don't need 10 different signs. You can have one sign that says precincts 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on are meeting here. But again, if you don't have that by now, that's another problem because that deadline's already passed. If you have a chance, take a look at where your location is. If you've never been to the school or the church or the community center where you're having your precinct caucus, it's not a bad idea to go out and take a look at it and see what it looks like. What are the rooms going to look like? What will the layout be? Are you going to, in some counties they may put 5 precincts in a room like this. In other counties they may put 1 precinct in a room like this. Obviously, how you think about precinct caucus is going to be different if you're stuck in a corner of a room with 5 different precincts, as opposed to if if you have a whole room to yourself. And that also, it's good to know that beforehand. So if you think that's going to be a problem, you can address it with your site director or your county party, and you can also psychologically be prepared for the fact that it might be kind of chaotic if 4 precincts or 2 precincts or whatever are meeting in one room. What does access look like? Is there going to be an issue with parking? Should you arrive there early to make sure that you have a parking spot? I mean, is it in a heavily dense area where there's just not a whole lot of parking? All these are issues where you don't want to find out at 6:45 p.m. that you're going to end up parking 30 minutes away from the location just because you didn't think about parking. And again, will you need to bring anything else? Would it be helpful if you brought a table or an extra few chairs to the caucus location? If you're running your precinct caucus, those are the kinds of things that you should be thinking about. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about publicizing the caucus. And again, this is primarily for people who are in charge of running their precinct caucus, because this is something that a lot of people forget about. Because they only look at that first bullet. A lot of people just look at that first bullet and say, okay, the county should handle the publicity. So it's up to the county, and it's up to these campaigns to make sure people get out to my precinct caucus. I think it's very important, particularly if you're a precinct committee person, it's part of your job to work to get people there yourself, to get people to come to precinct caucuses and get involved and let them know that it's going on. A lot of us live precinct caucuses. We never stop thinking about precinct caucuses. We dream precinct caucuses, 12 months out of the year. Most people don't even know what a caucus is, don't know where it is, don't know anything about it. Keep that in mind, that there are differing levels of familiarity with precinct caucuses, and particularly if someone just moved to Colorado 3 months ago, 6 months ago, they have no idea what a caucus is, most likely, particularly a caucus in Colorado. So make phone calls. You should have a list or the ability to get a list of people that are in your precinct. Feel free to send out postcards, try to find people's emails, even go door to door to tell people about the precinct caucus who are Democrats, and make sure they know what it is, know why it's important, and know when it is and how they can be a part of that. Let's talk about caucus night and what caucus night is going to look like. And this is, I think, really where we get into the nuts and bolts of the caucus training. And the reason why this is only a part of this presentation is, quite frankly, it's not as complicated as a lot of people think. It just isn't. Number one, there's an agenda in every packet for precinct caucuses. Follow the agenda. If you follow the agenda, you're usually going to be fine. Even if you don't know what you're doing, if you follow the agenda, that'll take care of almost every question you have. There's 3 things you need to remember that you have to do. Elect your delegates. Elect your delegates to the county assembly. Elect your precinct committee persons. These are the people that, the 2 people for each precinct, and I'll talk about that in a minute, who serve on the county central committee for 2 years, not just for the next couple of months, but for 2 years. Know your location and know the process, and you'll be fine. So let's talk about the agenda. The first thing on the agenda is determining who actually is eligible to participate. Anyone can come to a caucus. Someone who lives in Maine and is here visiting Aunt Nellie can come to caucus, but they just can't vote. Okay? So check your voter list, and again, this might be done by the people who are running the site. It might not necessarily be done in your precinct. Each county is going to, I think, do that a little bit differently. Again, now that we're using a van as opposed to a written voter list from the county clerk's office. But check that voter list and make sure you fill out your caucus attendance sheet. And again, this is going to be done a little differently, number one, than in past years, and I think it's going to be done a little differently from county to county. The state is going to have, the way the state's suggesting people do it, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but it's the way the state's suggesting it, is that they'll have a printout of every voter from Van in the precinct that's a Democrat. And so you'll be able to check off who is here, whether they're a delegate, how they voted, those kind of things. Some counties will have, instead of that, we'll just have a form where you have every person who shows up, you have to get their name, their address, their email, all that information on that form. But whatever you do, make sure you have that attendance sheet, whether it's the printout that you check off or whether it's something you have to fill out. Make sure that caucus attendance sheet is filled out. Now, if someone's not on the list, if someone's not on the voter list, and this was a point of a lot of contention last year, believe it or not, county clerks make mistakes. County election offices make mistakes. And there are so many people who insist the computer has to be right. There's no way it could be wrong. Computers make mistakes. So sometimes, occasionally, you might have someone who is not on that list. And there's a form in your packet called an affirmation of eligibility. Now, that affirmation of eligibility says, under oath, that person is saying, I am a registered Democrat in this precinct. I meet the requirements to participate at caucus. I don't know why I'm not on your sheets, but I should be, and I've done everything I need to do to be on those sheets. So they fill that out, and they can participate. It's just that simple. Some people get concerned, well, wait a second, anybody can show up and just sign that thing and they can participate? Well, yes, except, remember, there's a disincentive for someone committing fraud because that is a felony. So if someone's actually going out and purposefully trying to participate in caucus and they shouldn't be, they can be prosecuted. But that, quite frankly, election fraud is something the Republicans talk about, but there really isn't a whole lot of examples of it actually happening in the real world. A lot of people are confused because they see this affirmation of eligibility and they don't know what it is, so everybody fill one out and sign it. You only do that if you're not on the list. That's the only reason you would use that form. So most precincts won't even have to worry about someone using that form. The next thing on the agenda is the election of the people who will be your caucus chair and your caucus secretary. These people serve only on caucus night. These are not the precinct chair. This person is not the precinct secretary. They're the caucus chair and the caucus secretary. The chair runs the meeting, but unlike some other kinds of meetings, the chair has a right to vote completely as a participant. The chair does not give up his or her vote just because they're chair. The chair is not in this position where they only vote in case of a tie. The chair always votes just like they were anyone else, but they run the meeting. The secretary records the minutes, writes down what happens, and records the votes, and fills out the forms. Those are essentially the two jobs you elect on caucus night that serve on caucus night.